It was when I was about 15 years old, a friend of mine collected comics, and mainly Kirby comics, and brought over a bunch of Fantastic Fours. And I didn't collect comics or even care about them, and started looking at them, and basically Jack Kirby blew my mind. And after that, I got the itch and started collecting, and only Kirby. I didn't collect anyone else up until like 1980 when I went to college, then started again around 1997. That's me.
So my first encounter with Kirby was the Marvel Superheroes cartoon show.
Right.
And I liked it. And it got me interested in the fact as being kind of a, like, I don't know, a nice Lutheran church boy, being like, what? There's a god of thunder? So I went to my elementary school library and I took out a book, the Daulaire book of Greek and Roman and Norse myths. And that introduced me to mythology. But I will say that it did not encourage me to buy a comic book until much later, years later, when I was in summer camp. And at the sleepaway summer camp, when we would have these tents and cabins, and there was generally like a stack of comics that would kind of make its way around to the various boys' living quarters for rainy days, or we'd have time that was we didn't have to do anything, so we would just listen to the AM radio of the pop hits and read comics. Some guys would draw, some whatever, and there was this great stack of comics, and I decided that the next time that I had the opportunity, I was going to buy a comic to put in that stack because I enjoyed reading the stack so much. There were Harvey comics in there, Archie comics, superheroes, horror, army comics, as I called them back when I was a kid. And so the next time I had the opportunity, I went to a store nearby, and I bought a really weird Superman comic that had 8 figures of Superman hanging from ropes, because I knew Superman from the TV show and some cartoons. I bought the Flash because Flash 100-page super spectacular, because I remembered the Flash also from a cartoon show. And I also bought an issue of Commandy. And just because there was a kid with a giant grasshopper, a girl who didn't seem to be wearing anything on the top and had very her hair was strategically poised in every panel, and I knew that it was kind of a Planet of the Apes riff. I hadn't actually seen all the Planet of the Apes movies, but all my pals had, and it was kind of a part of the culture that Planet of the Apes was a thing. And I read I read all those comics. I read the Commandy comic and was like, oh my God, what is this? I have been sucked in. There's drama, there's heartache, it had everything. And I said to my pal, Fred, Fred, what the hell's the deal with this comic book? This Commandy comic, this comic has everything. And he goes, oh, well, that's Jack Kirby. That's all those other superhero comics that you just read with like Captain America and Thor and the Avengers. It was the summer of the Avengers Defenders clash. And all these comics that you read, Jack Kirby basically created all those characters. And that's when I got hit by the lightning bolt. I'm just like, I became an instant comic book fan, because I had been a fan of Peanuts and Blondie, newspaper strips, Mad Magazine. But suddenly it just all hit me at that age. I was 12, I guess, the magic age of 12. And it was like, suddenly it was just all comics and Jack Kirby. Like, it just changed my life.
So
Here I am.
Did you run out to like the comic store and start grabbing every Kirby comic?
There were no comic stores back then. It was a candy store and a newsstand.
Oh, that's true.
My buddy and I would like ride our bicycles all around all the different shops, and
we did that too.
Go to the different. This store always has that comic, and it was really fun, but it really was an issue of Commandy, and Freddie. My pal Fred also told me about the Fourth World at that time too. He knew about the Fourth World. He said he created this stuff, the Fourth World. It's been canceled, but like it's really, really cool. And
so was this like 1973, 4,
yeah,
something, 5?
Yep. So
I'm imagining Fred with like a wall with like red, like ropes leading to this is the Fourth World, and this is
yeah.
And Commandy is.
And we're like 13 years old in a tent upstate New York, of Sleepaway. It was great. It's really, I look fondly on that, and I'm glad that I'm still in contact with Fred on occasion.
Oh, cool.
Awesome.
Yeah. I let
I'm
him
still
know
in
it's all his
contact with my
fault.
buddy George too.
Yeah.
And I still have the original comics that he brought over to my house back then.
I was going to say, like, are those the ones that you like didn't return, like you forgot to give back? And
No, I ended up convincing him to let me have them, and he sold them to me. It was like Fantastic Four 60s, like 65, 66, around then.
Fantastic Four was those were my first Kirby books. Like I got them in reprints. For some reason, that cover of FF #1 got my attention. Like, what the hell? Like, how is he stretching around, and why is this guy like orange, and why is this kid on fire? And there's like, everything about it just something about those 60s Marvel books where they had the letters on the cover and they got your attention was just it's a slippery slope. It's like those Commandy books. Now you have to read all of them. And Randy, you were talking about like going into a store. Like now, if you go to a store, you see these in like bulletproof plastic boxes. And
So
they're like
sad.
selling them to the highest bidder. The Kirby's 70s stuff, the 70s stuff should be like Switzerland. Like anyone should be able to read those. Those should not be for the plastic box people.
Yeah, I know.
There's something to say about my first trip to New England was with the same friend. And we were in the station wagon with his parents driving. We went to like Maine, and in the back, we took all our comics, all our Kirby comics, had them all, how those old like 70s or early 80s or 70s station wagons, you could pull down, you just lay back. So we had stacks of comic books, reading them all the way from upstate to New York to Maine. It was pretty awesome. Listening to ELO music and reading comic books. What more is there to life?
Yes. You guys have seen the original art. I know Tom did that, what is it, the Pencils and Inks book, where you organized that. Going from fans and then going to seeing the original stuff, how did that happen? I mean, like, also I'm like fanboying a little bit because, like, where do you start with Kirby? But the museum started in 2005. How did you guys get to, preserving the art? Was this something that you just took upon yourself to do, or how does that happen?
I can answer. Do you want me to answer that?
Go ahead. Yeah.
It was like 10 in 1. But...
Well, because there's several reasons. Number one, original art's very, very expensive. It was less expensive in 2005 than it is now. But we realized that we're not going to get like a large archive of original art. So and there was a lot back in 2005. There was still a lot of complete books that were available in original art that was coming out at shows like San Diego Comic-Con, and those types of things I figured would be a really good asset for the museum to have, and scan them at high res museum quality DNGs front back, and allow that as a resource for the museum to have, and also to profit from in some way to help us fundraise, as an image source.
I mean, it was Tom's idea to scan the art, so we took to it, and it really, it's really been kind of a boon in a way, just to be able to have that archive. that allows us to see a lot of the work in progress. You can kind of make some inferences about, you know, how things were done by looking at the art, and in that way, and at a high level of, you know, scanning that we do. So that's really fun. And I don't know.
I would also say that we were very fortunate to have the opportunity to scan all the pencils. That was much later, probably, I don't know, 2010 or something. We started scanning pencils.
Oh, the family's collection of pencil photocopies.
Yeah, so we could match it with all these great original art scans that we have and see that process.
Right.
And like seeing you guys show off double page spreads, like the penciled versions, is just mind blowing, because, you know, you
Very
don't
rare.
see those around.
Yeah, they're rare. Yeah.
Yeah, most of those were never, there's no photocopies of pencils for the spreads. Although we do have some. Eternals had a bunch of them, and a couple of later ones, but they were too big for them to make copies of, because they had a photocopy machine that they just fed the art, which is kind of scary if you think about it. They just stacked it on the top of the scanner and had the automatic feeder send it through. So obviously the large art, the anything bigger than, you know, 11 by 17 wouldn't go through. So they didn't do it.
Sweating bullets, just thinking, like, what if something went wrong?
I know.
Got stuck.
Jack,
can you redraw?
You got to redraw this. Yeah.
He smokes a cigar in one drag, and you just see it. Yeah. But I mean, with the museum, was that something? Like, how do you do that? Was that something you just took upon yourself to say, hey, we are going to preserve Jack's memory? Did you have to talk to someone? Did you reach out to the family?
Well, the story was that I had, as a web designer and a graphic artist, here in Hoboken, New Jersey, I had actually developed a small group of clients who were small nonprofits that, you know, they weren't huge at all. And I'm like, wait a minute, look at these small nonprofits, you know, doing their thing. And I had been working with John Morrow, helping him with his website at Tomorrow's Publication, and with the Kirby Collector. And I'm just like, you know what? If anybody deserves like a nonprofit organization devoted to like promoting, preserving, and studying their work, it's someone like Jack Kirby. And, you know, this was before the whole the copyright window was about to close, so there was all this just weirdness with the various publishers, and it just seemed like the thing that, well, you know, here's the other thing. I had been to Europe, and I'd seen some, I think there was a Juan Miró and a museum in Barcelona, a Picasso museum in Barcelona as well, and maybe something else in Paris. And I'm just like, yeah, you know, all right, I think this is a thing that Jack Kirby deserves. And I found at the time that Gene Schulz had just started the Charles Schulz Museum and Research Center, and that's actually where I got the name from.
Yeah, because
it's the Charles Schulz Museum and Research Center. And so I'm like, yeah, Jack Kirby Museum and Research Center, that sounds right to me. And I suggested the idea to John Morrow. He thought it was cool, and he put me in touch with Lisa Kirby. And Lisa was like, yeah, we can do that. So those were the three people, you know, those two guys and me. We created the museum. And it was funny because, I don't know, 2 years later, I was at San Diego Comic-Con, and at John Morrow's booth. John was very kind and let us actually use some space at his booth for a few years. And right across the aisle was the Schulz Museum. So I went over to Gene Schulz and I was like, guess what? I created, you know, the Jack Kirby Museum, and gave it kind of the same name. And she goes, "Oh, that's funny, because after I did that, I realized that I should have called it a resource center, not a research center." And I was like, "You're right."
You're kidding. You never told me that.
It really would be better if it was a resource center than a research center. But that's okay. Whatever. It was just
Well, in the future, there might be a physical location, and we might have a research room.
That's right. That's right.
So it leaves the door open for
that's right.
The future.
Yeah. So that's kind of fun.
Which I wanted to ask you guys about the physical location, and I know you guys get this question pretty regularly. Randy, you brought up going to a museum, and you're thinking, "Hey, Jack Kirby deserves a museum." I wrote a rant about there was a piece where it's like a banana. I forget what the piece is called, and I don't really care because it's a stupid piece. But it's like a banana stuck to a wall with duct tape, and it was like $15,000.
Right.
Some guy came up and ate the banana, and I just read this whole diatribe about this thing has a whole promotion area, and Jack Kirby can't get
it's a challenge. I mean, we do rent some space for our archives, so in a sense we do have a physical space. It's just not a public facing gallery.
That's what we say.
Yeah. But it all depends on how well we can network and find the supporters, and really come up with a real plan, something that we think can happen. It's one thing to say, wouldn't it be nice, but to find a real space, or to find a real building, or to make something like that happen. I mean, that's the real challenge. And we've had a few things where we thought we might be able to point our efforts towards it, but it never really got that far to be able to really make a good plan. So hopefully someday something we'll just keep plugging away and hope we find something that we can hang our hat on, or whatever the appropriate term would be. I'm still wondering what's going on over at the birthplace on the Lower East Side. So I have to go see what's going on there. That might be
maybe available. At least put a statue or something down there, or
even that.
We were trying to get a plaque. We were trying to get a plaque on the building.
Plaque, statue, street corner.
Mm-hmm.
Stan Lee got a street named after him in the Bronx, and it's because the Bronx City Councilman wanted it to happen, and we can't find the city council person in Manhattan that wants to make something like that happen. So,
well, that said, we also have pre-pandemic, we were doing yearly pop-ups, almost yearly. We missed a couple of years, but that's our occasion to bring everything forward, and with all the resources that we have, allow us to show these comparisons and allow us to have studies, allow us to have speeches. The last one we did was on 2001: The Space Odyssey, which turned out to be really good, very watched. Yeah, and we're talking about possibly doing one later this year.
Yeah. Rand, I remember Tom brought up Space Odyssey, and I remember in one of your guys' live streams, you mentioned possibly being in talks for maybe bringing the Space Odyssey books back in reprint form. Is that happening? Is that something you guys aren't talking about?
So when we started the museum in 2005, that was one of the first things I started to talk to people about, especially once we started developing the archive with the pencil photocopies from the family, because it's okay, even if we just have a nice color reprint of the comics in a great form, which we're just at that time we're coming out, that the Marvel stuff from that era was starting to look a little bit better in reprint form, that maybe they had the film available, or they were figuring out process. So, you know, so I kind of knew that there would be a good color version that could happen. And then we had access to all these photocopies. So I was like, yeah, look like, you know, we could do a nice color version and then do a photocopy version, put it in a slipcase and call it the Black Monolith Edition. and I just thought that was just, you know, like, why can't this happen? Well, it's really hard to make it happen. And I believe it kind of falls down into like the fact that the people who made the movie and wrote the novel really don't want it to happen. So that's pretty much it. We could have another exhibit and really actually create a catalog, which was our opportunity that we missed. But yeah, it's somebody. I left out a part of that story, which was that there were when I started the museum and I had this idea for this, you know, slipcased edition. I mentioned it to two people who are well versed in gaining licenses for entertainment comics and reprinting them. And they were like, you know, that's a great idea. And they went off. And then I checked in with them later and they're like, no, not going to happen. I hit a brick wall. And then it happened again recently. Somebody was like, you know, I've got a line into these people, you know, from this other project that I worked on. Maybe I can make it happen. And I'm like, let me know. And nothing. Yeah, they're really great comics. I mean, you know, as Tom said, we did like how many days? I don't know how many days it was, but we did that exhibit, and it was just so much 2001 love, and it was just great. Those comics are awesome. You know, so maybe someday.
You're just pushing your 2001 boulder up the hill. And
yeah, that's right. The stone spirit will speak.
Well, we may have another opportunity if we do what we may be planning for the next pop-up, you know, for a catalog.
Right. You know, the funny thing is, Sean, that I went to, as I mentioned earlier, I was in Barcelona in 2001. 2000 or 2000, I forget. But I bought the most beautifully printed version of Bicentennial Battles in Spain that year. And it's never been printed that well again until just now in the US. Like a nice tabloid, beautiful.
Was it in Spanish, I assume?
Yeah, it was. But yeah. I bought 3 copies. I gave 2 away to some friends and
amazing
kept it. But like, I was just like, what? Why? Look, I bought this. It was on tissue paper in the 70s. Now it's beautiful.
Oh, it's horrible.
Yeah, it's
horrible
terrible.
Papers. Yeah.
So yeah, it's really great that they did that.
There was an interview that Rand did in 1992. Did you guys meet Kirby? Or and for Rand, did you meet him more than that one time?
Yes, I did. So I met him. Meet is a hard word because I know he was at Comic Cons that I'd go to, and I was definitely there and interested in seeing him, but like I had no conception of anything that I would ever say to him. You know, it was just like, Jack Kirby, holy smokes. And all my buddy and I, all we really wanted to do was watch him draw. And that was the first time I went to see him in New York City. And we did. We got to sit, you know, he was doing sketches. Roz was there. I'm sure Neil was there and other people. He had his own room. And my buddy and I was, you know, 14 years old, just kind of standing there like watching, you know, no, because you're 15 years old. You have $50 to spend at comics on a comic convention. Are you gonna give Jack Kirby $20 for a drawing? not when you're 14 years old. You're going to buy those comic books. At least that's what we did, So we were just watching him and really enjoying it. And then I know I saw him at another con, the Miami Con, 1975. I got him to sign my New Gods #1.
Cool.
I got, and that's when Neil Adams signed an issue of Green Lantern, Green Arrow for me, and I was really enjoying. I hate to say this, but I like it. Whatever, because I was I was there, and like Jack is there, and Roz is there, and Neil Adams, and then like Stan Lee showed up, man, and I was really bummed. I'm just like, he's like, Stan's sucking all the air out of the room. Like,
you said Stan Lee, and I was like, wait, no, I know which angle he's gonna take with this.
So anyhow.
What did he say? Was he
just too much
Stan?
energy. He was being Stan, and it was just like everything was pretty cool and nice, and people were drawing, and then how you doing? Like, oh God, I was not happy about that. And that may have been the only 2 times, and then the interview that Andrew and I, Andrew really arranged, my pal Andrew at the time, and we got to meet him and go to a hotel room and interview him, and that's a really cool interview. And Andrew was very well prepared, and I was not. I was like, wow, I'm gonna go talk to Jack. It'll be great.
I mean, I love that conversation because you guys bring up OMAC, which is one of my favorite comics ever.
Oh yeah.
And even then you guys are talking about in 1970, in the 1970s he's talking about virtual reality, and there's that issue, you open it up and he's wearing the headset.
Yeah. And that's what that magazine that we were interviewing him for was all about, was that early VR stuff. And so we were just we realized in this online internet / forum BBS kind of thing that Jack Kirby was, pretty prescient as far as that stuff was concerned. So let's get him, and talk about stuff.
All right. So Tom, did you ever get to meet Kirby before No.
Not at all. So it's very quick. Yeah, no, I it's kind of funny because when I was collecting Kirby before I started college and stopped, I just thought that he was just, a fad or just would not be known or anything. And then in 1994, I was doing web work. I'm a designer, a UI designer, UX designer, but then it wasn't called that back then. And I was on the internet, which was relatively new in 1994, and found out that he had died. And it's like I couldn't believe it. It's like I didn't even know people would remember the guy.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, no, unfortunately, if I would have known, I probably would have tried to meet him, but I never had a chance. So, but I feel like I've met him. I know all a lot of his family. I've talked to so many people close to him that I feel in a lot of ways I've always met him. So.
Yeah, I mean that's cool too. It's kind of like seeing him in a second life. Like not only does his work stay behind, in his place, but you get to talk to people who knew him. And I wanted to mention Steve Sherman because that was one of those things where it was really sudden. But
yeah,
one of Jack Kirby's aides, you guys even talked to him very recently. I think that was his last interview.
It's true. It's so sad, so sudden. We had a webcast with him on June 6th, I think, and he passed away at the end of the month. So yeah, nobody expected it. We had heard that his health wasn't that great, but I never would have expected it. It was a total shock.
Yeah.
Because I spend a lot of time, he used to go to San Diego Comic Fest every year, and I used to see him there. And then I used to be on panels with him and talk to him a lot. He'd show up even at the LA Comic Art Show once or twice, and we just sit down and just talk. It was just great. I'm gonna miss him definitely.
Yeah, we had it was great. He pretty much just joined us at our booth at San Diego. When was the last San Diego?
2019.
Time is compressed. 2019. Yeah. No, he was with us there, and that was really great. He was such a pleasure to spend all those. I mean, by 3 or 4 days with Steve at the booth. Really nice, and he was. It's really a drag that he passed away. So I'm gonna miss him.
He was always available for us. He supported the museum.
Yeah.
He even would bring pins with him sometimes. And in 2019, his wife sewed up some hats. I still have it.
Yeah.
With the silhouette of Jack on with a pipe at his drafting table. So he loved doing that kind of stuff.
He was so funny because he showed up with these like demon pins and Black Panther pins, and I'm like, Steve, like, big companies. He's like, Jack told me I could do whatever I wanted. I'm like, okay, Steve, I didn't ask you to do it. So he just brought them and helped us raise money. It's really great, really fun. I think one thing that happened was he was very. I think he was in. Well, his brother Gary. I think his brother Gary died a number of years ago, and they were kind of instrumental in the Paul McCartney, Jack Kirby meeting. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, and that piece never ceases to blow my mind.
I know. It's just like it's the weirdest, coolest, funnest thing, because it's like, come on, Paul McCartney had a song, Magneto and Titanium Man, mentioned the Crimson Dynamo. So then it's like, I think Gary called the record company and wrangled some tickets, and it was they actually had, McCartney had a big piece of art behind him on the stage of those three characters, and I had indeed the pleasure of finding all the references that the artist used to make the sources to make that art. Cool. And I contacted like hardcore Paul McCartney, Beatles concert recording archivists, and found the show that Jack and Roz and Lisa and Steve and Gary attended, and it's somewhere on our website where it's like there's this little clip where I guess they had gone to see them before the show, and then they're at the show, and I honestly believe it's Denny Lane, not Paul McCartney. They introduce the song, and it's like, the music is getting that chug-a-lug thing, and then Denny Lane goes, "Where are you, Jack? Rock it." Who's he talking to? And of course Roz was complaining about all the pot that was being smoked, and like was like wearing a handkerchief on her face through most of the show. But that was a fun project, and Lisa, Kirby, and I think Steve had sent us photos, and I think most of the photos you see of that back scene scenario came from Lisa and Steve to us, and then kind of made it out onto the interwebs.
Yeah, I was going to ask, and I'm glad you covered it. It's just one of those weird meetups you see. There are photos of Jack with Frank Zappa.
Yeah.
There's that like Kiss piece that Jack did that Gene Simmons didn't know about until afterwards. Just
recently revealed. Well, did he really not? I don't know if he was like asking, is that really by Jack Kirby? And I wasn't gonna authenticate anything, but I on Twitter I said, we know that where we saw that piece of art and where it came from, and it came from the Kirby house. Take it from there, like
where did the art appear? Is it something that we scanned, or
it's that Kiss piece?
Yeah,
it was in the box that you scanned.
Right, so that was it. Okay.
Yeah,
I didn't know if
And I guess it maybe it showed up on
It showed on a comic dealer's art site for sale.
Correct.
Yes.
And it was just a photocopy of the art, right?
Yes, right.
Yeah.
It was just photocopy.
So the photocopy showed up for sale, and then somehow it took a little while, and it ended up with Gene Simmons posting it on Twitter, saying, "Jack Kirby." And I was like, I waited a few days, and I was like, we scanned a photocopy of this that came from Jack's house. Take it from there. And it had been rumored, Shaw, for a long time that art existed.
Do you think it had anything to do with the Marvel Kiss edition that was done in the 70s?
I think it was a presentation piece for a cartoon.
Oh, okay.
That's my guess.
I mean, first off, all the insane things that you guys get sent in, and then you scan it, and then it just makes its way out in the world. But
I still want to say something about Paul McCartney. Can we go back?
Yeah, please.
So I do all this research. I get this concert recording of Denny Lane. Say, where are you? And I actually created something, a graphic saying like this artwork is not by Jack Kirby. Here's the artwork it came from. Blah blah blah. Doing all this research, and then one of the roads that I had to travel was the fact that somebody had said that the artwork was sold, offered for sale in Goldmine magazine one year, and I found that ad of somebody selling it, and the guy selling its name was Gary. And I was like, and I actually reached out to Steve Sherman. I said, "Is that your brother selling that artwork?" And he's like, "No, Rand, come on." And I'm like, "I'm so sorry. My brain, we make these connections. And when it's simple like that, it's like," but I apologize to him, in his brother's memory. But he was like, "No, that was just some guy from the record company." Like, I'll tell you, the story about Paul was that he was recording in Jamaica, somewhere in the Caribbean, and comic books had helped him and his kids make it through the period of time. So they probably had actually read the comics that they used the art for, because that was from the 70s, right? And then Jack shows up and says, I'm the guy who created all those characters. And I believe there was an anecdote, from Steve or Lisa or something, saying that Paul McCartney said, "Well, you saved my time in the recording. You saved my life." And I have the feeling that it was kind of like, but Jack didn't draw those comics.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's almost like, I wonder if Paul really got who Jack was.
So do you think Jack was just being polite?
Oh, Jack was always polite and very kind. And I think that the connection, I just suspect that Paul and Linda may not have made that connection. Wait, but you didn't draw that comic that we read in last year in Jamaica. Who are you again? I don't know. That's just, I imagine stuff like that all the time. So I could be way off base, and they fully knew that Jack was the creator of Captain America, co-creator Captain America, Fantastic Four, and all that great stuff too. But they didn't. That artwork was sold pretty soon there afterwards in Goldmine magazine. So whatever that is.
By Gary, the unnamed,
the non-Sherman Gary, yeah, at Capitol Records in Los Angeles.
Again, all of the stuff that you guys get in, where it's just even decades after it happened, it's like, well, here's a revelation.
Yeah, another deep dive, and then another deep dive, right, Tom?
Well, going back to the photocopy in 2019, I went to the Palladium, which actually had the Torpedo Comic Con, and it's actually happening in a couple of weeks. I'm going to go back, and some guy comes up with this big box stuffed with stuff, you know, and not like organized and probably getting ruined in the box, and just plops it down on Mike Thibodeau's desk or his table and says, "What is this stuff? You know, I got this from Roz, and Roz back in the 90s had this extra box of stuff that they just stuffed everything into it, and he just bought the box, and he's had the box ever since then, and it just shows up and all this." There wasn't a lot of original art in it, but there was some very choice original art, like the costumes for the play, the Caesar play, and there were a couple other animation things, but a lot of photocopies, some of which, including the Kiss, we'd never seen before. So you never know when something's going to show up. And we go to these shows, and what's nice over the years, all these years of scanning stuff and going to people's houses and scanning, people come to us now at these shows and say, "Oh, I found this cool piece. You want to scan it?" You know, and it's like, you just don't know what's going to show up. You never know.
Yeah, it's really, really amazing what pops up.